from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu.
The president's envoy arrives in Moscow. Welcome to the Tuesday edition as Steve Witkoff meets today with Vladimir Putin, Jared Kushner in tow, in hopes of selling a peace deal that's been revised greatly since the Russians were involved. Of course, all of this about Ukraine, and we'll have the latest for you as we discuss with Liana from the Council on Foreign Relations and with our political panel this hour. As the Secretary of Defense now pledges to continue striking boats, drug boats in the Caribbean, despite concerns about legality. We'll get reaction from Republican Congressman Carlos Gimenez of Florida. All after a look at Wall Street. Been a pretty good day so far, and Charlie Pellet has the latest on the Tuesday trade from World Headquarters in New York. Charlie, how's it going?
Hi, thank you very much, Joe Mathieu. Indeed, good day for the bulls with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all higher. But right now, we've got the S&P 500 index, a little change. Perhaps the key takeaway at this hour, looking at a 1-point gain on the S&P 500 index. The Dow Industrials up 82 now, up by about 0.2%. NASDAQ up 85. The NASDAQ Composite Index up 0.4%. And our Mag 7 index up just under 0.1%. The 10-year yield, 4.09%. We've got the 2-year yielding 3.52%. Spot gold now down by almost $40 the ounce to $41.94, down 0.9%. West Texas Intermediate crude, 58.90 a barrel. WTI down 0.7%. And Bitcoin had been down as much as 8% yesterday. Bitcoin today rebounding. Bitcoin right now up by 5.9%, 91,526 on Bitcoin. Boeing leading the Dow higher. Boeing shares are surging now by 8.7%. By the way, 16 Dow members higher, 14 lower. Boeing says it expects to generate cash again in 2026. That is a significant reversal in the plane maker's finances as it prepares to boost monthly production rates and pushes ahead with certification of the much-delayed 777X jetliner. Again, Boeing bears repeating up 8.7%. Recapping here, U.S. stocks pushing higher. S&P up by just under 0.1%. Bitcoin right now up 0.5%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. Back we go to Washington as Balance of Power continues. And once again, your host, here is Joe Mathieu.
Many thanks, Charlie. We'll have more on the stock market, bonds, crypto, and the rest when we check in with Charlie in about 20 minutes from now. Speaking of crypto, I do want to let you know, at the bottom of the hour, a little bit after 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, we're going to be talking with Gary Gensler. Yes, Gary Gensler, who one time, of course, ran the SEC. And the former chairman is going to talk today about what we've been seeing in the crypto space and beyond when we spend some time together, about 1:40 if you want to set your clocks East Coast time. We've got our eyes on the cabinet room at the White House. President Trump has been going for a little more than an hour, remembering that sometimes these can last several. Of course, wrapped around the cabinet table with the heads of each agency, and they're going one by one, delivering updates on what's happening here, backed by a number of reporters who at some point will be invited to ask questions, and we'll bring you in the room when that takes place. Much of the conversation today zeroing in around our policy, our military policy in the Caribbean, but also our support for Ukraine and the drive toward peace. Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are in Moscow right now, and they'll be meeting any time now with the time change with Vladimir Putin. It was supposed to be an early nighttime session, and it's unclear how long they're going to be going here. Remembering, there was a 28-point peace plan the U.S. hammered out with Russia. Once Ukrainians were involved, that was whittled down to 19 points. And this could be a non-starter already for Vladimir Putin. We heard earlier from Dmitry Peskov, Kremlin spokesman, who said that the meeting was expected to take place early evening, but no details on unresolved issues or timing. Negotiations will go on, quote, as long as necessary, unquote. President Zelensky of Ukraine watching all the while and spoke earlier about the process in Dublin. Let's listen.
We are waiting for the results in America-Russia negotiations, today's results, and I will react according to the results. If I feel that we can count on real, specific dialogue, not just words, with some result, we will meet, and he's very welcome to Ukraine, but I'm not sure that they are up on this way these days. They're ready to combat it, but who knows?
It is unclear if a final product will emerge or if it will be palatable to either side, which is where we start our conversation with Liana Fix, Senior Fellow for Europe at the Council on Foreign Relations. Liana, I'm guessing your expectations are pretty low here. What could come from this meeting today?
So what we are certainly going to see is at least some kind of simulation from the Russian side that they are willing to negotiate, because this whole new negotiation effort from a Russian perspective really served the purpose of averting increased pressure from the United States and Europe. And so far it has been successful. Pretending to be willing to negotiate from the Russian side makes actually much more sense than just refusing any negotiation proposal from the outset.
Mm-hmm. Interesting optics yesterday ahead of this meeting. Vladimir Putin decided to visit the troops, went to a battlefield command post, and grew visibly angry and emotional based on the reporting that we've seen here after a commander reported that Ukrainian soldiers were dying by the hundreds, their bodies littering the tree lines. This is a tragedy, he said, with the Ukrainian audience, I guess, in mind. A tragedy for the Ukrainian people connected to the criminal policies of the thieving junta that seized power in Kyiv. This doesn't sound like somebody who's prepared to sit across the table from President Zelensky, does it?
No, and it also signals that from Russia's perspective, there's no future for a Western Ukraine, even if Ukraine accepts a Russian occupation and de facto control over Eastern Ukraine. That Vladimir Putin does not see a future for Western Ukraine as a free society that can choose freely its leaders, freely its alliances, and is liberal, democratic, and prosperous. He wants to have all of Ukraine under his control, either militarily in the east or politically by influencing Ukrainian elections, by weakening the Ukrainian state after any ceasefire agreement on Russian terms has been found. So this is a ceasefire would, from Russia's perspective, just be a different continuation of warfare, political warfare, for the west of Ukraine instead of military warfare in the east of Ukraine.
Well, as Russia continues to make military advances, it's why he was in the battlefield, to show off the momentum that his troops are enjoying. In what world does anyone think that Vladimir Putin wants to negotiate or bring this to an end?
So apparently the administration, the U.S. administration, does see such signs of willingness to negotiate. But the problem here really is that the U.S. negotiation team seems to be very open of taking Russian demands at face value, and seems much more reluctant to accept Ukrainian and European red line. So if you go into a negotiation with the assumption that you just have to pressure the weaker side enough to make a compromise work that basically undermines Ukraine's existence as an independent state, then of course you can get an outcome. And that is what we are seeing right now. That is what the Europeans and the Ukrainians are pushing against. And now we have to see how the Kremlin is playing this new proposal, if he's trying to drag out negotiations, Vladimir Putin, or if he tries another way of averting pressure from Russia and trying to achieve his still maximalist gains in Ukraine.
So what are you going to be watching after this meeting? Steve Witkoff is going to call the boss, obviously, and then we'll get presumably a readout from President Trump on Truth Social. How different will that read than what we hear from the Russians?
So in the past, Vladimir Putin has not been particularly smart about meeting with Trump and negotiating these ideas. In Alaska, remember, he apparently, as was reported, entertained Trump with historical lessons for a really long time, something that Trump obviously is not interested in at all, distorted historical lessons, all the more about Ukraine belonging to Russia and so on. So I'll be watching if Vladimir Putin has become a little bit more flexible tactically politically if he sees the need, to give the Trump administration more reason to believe that he's actually willing to negotiate, or if he's just going back to his maximalist talk about a Ukrainian junta, about the need for Russia to occupy all of Ukraine's east, and the end of any military support for Ukraine by Western allies. I think it will be difficult to spin maximalist Russian position as a success for the Trump administration. But if they don't get that, it would be the third failed attempt to negotiate over Ukraine, which then might result in another round of frustration and perhaps increased pressure on Russia, thinking tomahawks here, thinking the Congress sanctions bill on Russia.
Just lastly, Liana, this is the 6th visit for Steve Witkoff, who has said openly that he's a big fan of Vladimir Putin. I think they met for 6.5 hours at one point. I don't know what kind of a party is going on over there or what kind of a meeting is going on over there. But when you see two people get close like this, what is the other side? What do Ukrainians make of Steve Witkoff? Do they trust him?
From a Ukrainian perspective, I think the main problem with Witkoff is that he lacks expertise. It's difficult for him to really distinguish what is a Russian bluff, what is a Russian lie, and what is the actual reality. He also does not have advisors around him or note takers who can not only help with some fact-checking of Vladimir Putin, but also some note take on what the Russian side actually says. In the past, there has been confusion about issues that Witkoff reported back to the United States, a willingness to compromise from the Russian side, which is not actually what the Russians or what Vladimir Putin has said. So Witkoff, from a Ukrainian perspective, is an unreliable negotiator who tends to be too open from a Ukrainian perspective for Russian positions and does not fully seem to understand the history of the conflict and also the history of Russian imperial ambitions in the region fully well.
Yeah. Well, great conversation, Liana. I appreciate your joining us. Liana Fix with the Council on Foreign Relations, where she's Senior Fellow for Europe. We assemble our panel for their take on this. We've been talking about it with Rick and Jeanne since this war began. Bloomberg Politics contributors Jeanne Zaino and Rick Davis. He is our Republican strategist and partner at Stonecourt Capital. Jeanne is Democracy Visiting Fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center. Really interesting, Rick, to hear her refer to Steve Witkoff as an unreliable negotiator, unable to tell what is a Russian bluff, what is a Russian lie, no note takers in the room. What's Witkoff going to get done here tonight?
Look, I think it's going to be just more of the same. I mean, we've seen this act now for over a year where, Witkoff will go and spend a lot of time with Vladimir Putin and come back and basically ape the Russian propaganda. I mean, when you're meeting with Vladimir Putin, you have to assume everything he's telling you is a lie. And it's all part of a Russian propaganda campaign. I mean, nobody does it better than Vladimir Putin. And so if you don't see through the smoke, you'll never make progress toward a achievable end. And most people I've talked to who are watching these negotiations with experience on, dealing with Vladimir Putin for the last few decades, all agree that we're nowhere near getting anything done on a deal, because at some point, the U.S. has to make it clear to the Russians, to Vladimir Putin, that they have to accept a deal or it's only going to get worse for them. Either more sanctions, the congressional sanctions that are being talked about now are exactly the kind of thing that can help break the back of this negotiation. Not Witkoff building a trust relationship with Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin doesn't trust anybody. He doesn't trust Russians. He doesn't trust Americans. He doesn't trust Ukrainians. So all that effort going forth to build that level of trust and that relationship is frankly a waste of time.
So, Jeanne, why is President Trump so patient with Vladimir Putin?
I think the headline we saw the other day in one of the newspapers about making money, not war. I think this is a president who likes to make deals. And I think he and people he associates with see this as a deal that he can make if he can just strong arm Ukraine and Europe to go along with it. So I think there is some of that. I also think he sees realistically that Ukraine does not have much in terms of its ability going forward to win on the battlefield without a lot more support from Europe and the United States, which he doesn't see it forthcoming from the U.S. So I think there are a lot of reasons like that. We understand this is Jared Kushner's first face-to-face visit with Putin on this issue, which I think is going to be fascinating. But I agree with Rick. I don't see much coming out of this. The 28-point plan that Witkoff originally brought forward was a surrender document that is not going to sell in Ukraine or Europe, even though Zelensky is politically weakened in his own country, given this corruption scandal. It's just not going to fly. And so they're going back with this 19-point plan. And yet you just discussed the fact that Putin describes the Ukrainian government as a junta and has said publicly numerous times he cannot and will not make a deal with Zelensky. So you sort of throw up your hands and say, if he's not even willing to make a deal with Zelensky, who is the leader of the other side, how is this going to happen? And of course, what we're seeing is he's not dealing with Zelensky. He's dealing with Witkoff and Kushner. So I think this is a non-starter, and I think the president's going to have some really tough decisions to make going forward. But I am not confident he is going to side with Europe and Ukraine on this any more than he already has.
Well, as we talk potential peace here in Ukraine, Rick, another attack on a Russian tanker here, purportedly from Ukraine. It was a drone attack that has now prompted Vladimir Putin to warn Russia may consider striking the ships of other countries supporting Ukraine if the surge in attacks on Moscow's tanker fleet does not stop. I don't know how many nations that includes, but we're looking at you, Europe, and maybe even the U.S., Rick. When you hear this kind of rhetoric against the backdrop of a peace negotiation, he's sitting down with Witkoff and Kushner, maybe as we speak right now. What does that tell you?
You know, it's just another piece of, Vladimir Putin's Russian propaganda. I mean, the one thing that is absolutely certain is that he cannot afford anyone else to enter this fight but Ukraine. He feels like he can beat Ukraine on a one-on-one. And it's, of course, been 4 years, and he hasn't accomplished that. So it's been no easy task for him. But if any Western organization, country gets into this fight, it's over for him. He cannot sustain a multi-front battle against a Western, well-equipped, well-trained military. He's got a killing field going on right now, and as long as he's got young men to put into it, he has an army. But against a sophisticated, technologically advanced, well-trained army of the West, he doesn't stand a chance. So all of this is just a big bluff. Remember, he was going to use nuclear weapons, if certain acts were perpetrated against him by the Ukrainians. This is all the same thing. And so, again, you just can't take him on face value. Everything's a game to Vladimir Putin. And if we're not playing the same game and understand what he's trying to accomplish, we're going to let him get the upper hand.
Well, maybe he's met a gamer in Donald Trump, Jeanne. In our remaining 30 seconds, remember when Trump was talking about putting nuclear subs in the waters of Russia?
Yeah, absolutely. And, they are quite an interesting match. And, Joe, I also wanted to add the corruption scandal in Ukraine that people describe as playing out like a Netflix documentary or a movie online and on the Internet is just another wrinkle in this entire thing that weakens Zelensky.
Wow. It's not getting any easier, guys, but very glad to have you with us. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino, Bloomberg Politics contributors, the best in the business, and a great panel. We thank you. We're going to turn to what's happening in the Caribbean next. Congressman Carlos Gimenez will be with us only here on Bloomberg. The cabinet meeting is still underway. The president's going to hit 2 hours in just about 20 minutes time here as he goes around the table. We've done this together a few times now, the round robin of agency heads, giving him an update on what's happening inside each agency that falls under the executive. The first person we heard from, interestingly, after the president's own remarks that he opened with, was the defense secretary, someone we have heard a heck of a lot about over the past couple of days here, Pete Hegseth, speaking to a couple of matters within the Pentagon, including retention rates, enlistment levels, and then he went directly for the story in Venezuela, having been accused effectively in the Washington Post of ordering a kill everyone order when we attacked the first alleged drug boat coming out of Venezuela. Didn't get everybody with the first missile. As we discussed yesterday, there were 2 men clinging to wreckage, and a second missile was fired, killing them as well. Washington Post suggesting that was Pete Hegseth with the order, but it was in fact, as we learned from the White House, Admiral Frank Bradley, well regarded in the Pentagon, a man of deep experience, knowing as well that Hegseth was watching all the while. He had said very clearly he watched the attack live and in real time. So there are questions about chain of command, which Hegseth did not address when he spoke to reporters a short time ago. Listen.
As I've said, and I'll say again, we've only just begun striking narco boats and putting narco terrorists at the bottom of the ocean. President Trump said, no, we're taking the gloves off. We're taking the fight to these designated terror organizations, and it's exactly what we're doing. So we're stopping the drugs, we're striking the boats, we're defeating narco terrorists.
Great opportunity to spend some time with Congressman Carlos Gimenez, the Republican from Florida's 28th district. We've got Miami in our sights, is with us now on Bloomberg TV and radio, a member of the Armed Services Committee specializing in readiness, tactical air and land forces. Congressman, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. It's great to have you. You've made pretty clear that narco terrorists are, in fact, a true threat, a terror threat to the United States. Does this need to end with regime change, or is this program underway now what we need?
No, the program is underway with this is exactly what we need. And even if there is regime change in Venezuela, there are still other narco terrorists running around in the region, in Colombia, Mexico. There's also, we know that they've been responsible for a lot of the fentanyl that's been coming into the United States and killing tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Americans. And so even if there is regime change in Venezuela, I think that's just the beginning of the fight against these narco terrorists.
There's a lot of folks who are worried about what might happen to Admiral Frank Bradley. We're hearing the term scapegoat, knowing that there are a couple of important investigations underway, and he's going to be testifying, we understand, on Thursday before Armed Services. I don't know if you're going to be part of that conversation, Congressman. I'd love to hear what questions you would have for him and whether you are concerned that that order was unlawful.
Well, look, I don't think the law, any order was unlawful. I think that they have been designated as a foreign terrorist organization. They're carrying deadly drugs that kill Americans, and trying to get them into the United States. And so I don't see that any different. Actually more dangerous than a boat full of Al-Qaeda terrorists bringing bombs into the United States. I mean, that's the same thing to me. They're killing Americans, and frankly, a boatload full of drugs has the potential to kill far more Americans than a boat full of explosives. And so, everybody's hung up on this as these are drugs. Yeah, these are drugs that are killing Americans, all right? And these are terrorists that are bringing these drugs into America. They have been for years. The fact that no administration has ever deemed it this way, the fact that we're actually taking the fight to them, and this war to them. They've declared war on us a long time ago, right? And now we're taking it to them, and everybody's astounded. To me, I'm saying, hey, it's about time that we took the gloves off and we started treating these people like what they are. They're foreign terrorists that are killing American citizens.
I do appreciate your position on that. I guess the question is, after the first strike, when you see 2 people no longer considered combatants when they're floating in the water, is it okay to go after wounded survivors or any survivors and kill them, as we apparently did?
Yeah, but apparently, that's only, that's what people are saying, okay? But also, you got to complete the mission, and the mission is to destroy the boat, destroy all the drugs. And I'm not going to second guess, a highly decorated admiral in what he thought was necessary to complete the mission, because I'm sure what the mission is destroy the boat, destroy all the drugs. Yeah. And maybe, just maybe, the boat wasn't fully destroyed, and maybe all the drugs weren't destroyed either. And so, that's what I'm thinking is actually what happened. And I'm not going to second guess this admiral in what was going through his mind when he gave the order to launch a second strike. I mean, a lot of it has to be investigated, and that's fine. Bring the admiral before the committees, and then we'll ask him and discuss exactly what happened and the sequence of events. But I'm not going to jump in front of this and say, oh my God, it's horrible and all that. No, I'm gonna give the admiral the benefit of the doubt. I think he deserves that.
Sure. Well, and I know that you'll have a chance to question him, so we don't want you to jump to conclusions here. I guess I just wonder if some of these alleged narco-terrorists would be more valuable if we took them prisoner, try to go up the chain of command.
Well, maybe they would be, all right? But, you know, it's, remember, you somehow think that there are assets in the area that somehow can activate a rescue operation or an apprehension. Yeah. You know, a lot of these things happen because, you know, you're talking about a really large area of the earth, and we don't have assets everywhere. Now, can we reach out and touch you? Yeah, we can reach out and touch you, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we have a boat in the area, a ship in the area that can actually go out and effectuate that rescue. And so, you know, again, I don't have all the details of what was in the area. I don't have all the details of what could have happened. And again, I'm not going to second guess the Admiral on this instance unless, you know, some action that he took was actually something that we can second guess. And we don't have that information yet.
President's talking to Maduro, Congressman. Could you see a diplomatic solution here, or does this need to end militarily?
No, I think I can see a diplomatic solution where Maduro leaves quietly or leaves publicly, goes to a country that will offer him asylum. I think the president has actually offered him and said, you got to leave. Now, the president didn't offer him his amnesty because, you know, Maduro is guilty of crimes. We have a $50 million bounty on his head. And so the president can't offer amnesty, but I can see where Maduro can end up in some other country where maybe there's no extradition, and then he can, you know, live out his life, him and his family. I'd rather see that. I don't want to see any further bloodshed. You know, the final thing that has to happen is Maduro has to leave. He's the illegitimate ruler of Venezuela. There's a legitimate government in waiting. He is the head of a designated terrorist organization, the Cartel de los Soles. They have been killing Americans for years. There's blood on his hands. And so, yeah, for the benefit of the people of Venezuela, but also for the benefit of the security of the United States and its citizens, Maduro has to go.
How do we rationalize that with the president's decision to pardon the former president of Honduras, Juan Orlando Hernandez, who was convicted for moving hundreds of tons of cocaine into this country? How is that coming from the same administration, Congressman, and is that something that you supported?
No, nobody asked me, and look, I'm not a big fan of pardons by anybody if somebody's been convicted. The president has his reasoning. He felt that it was unjust, and so, you know, he has that power. You know, it doesn't negate the fact of the actions that he's taken against Maduro and the narco traffickers from Venezuela. So I fully support that. I really didn't have that much information on this former president and what he was convicted on. Frankly, the first time I'd heard his name was a couple days ago when they mentioned the pardon.
The president says it looks like Honduras is trying to change the results of their presidential election. He posted last evening, if they do, there will be hell to pay. Are you concerned about the U.S. getting involved in the Honduras election?
You know, I'm concerned about the Honduran government, which is a leftist government, far left government, is trying to steal the elections. They stopped counting after 46% of the vote was put in, with the two opposition leaders far out in front of the incumbent government. And so we had some conversations with some of these other candidates in the last couple of weeks, told us what was going to happen if in fact the results weren't coming their way, and sure enough, they stopped counting. And yeah, I have concerns that in Honduras they're going to try to steal the election, just like Maduro stole the election last year. This is how these government works. Okay, they use democracy against democracy to make sure that democracy doesn't win out in the end, and it's no joke to the people of Honduras. And so I'm very concerned at the fact they stopped counting after 46% when they knew and they saw the results, these results, that they were going to get blown out of the water. How convenient that there's a stop counting, and now they're going to probably declare themselves the winner and steal the election. That's not democracy, and that shouldn't exist in our hemisphere.
Congressman Carlos Gimenez, Republican from Florida. We thank you, Congressman, for your time. That initial digital push will be followed up by hand-counted votes. This is Bloomberg. So we've been watching Bitcoin almost as much as stocks lately because it's been so intrinsically tied to the markets. Remember when it was supposed to be its own universe? That was the whole point, the decentralized cryptocurrency. It is bouncing back today, up $5,400 and approaching $92,000 a coin. So maybe it bottomed. Unclear, as we've had multiple folks, including Mike McGlone at Bloomberg Intelligence, predict another crypto winter. Michael Saylor also preparing for one at Strategy. Despite the love this administration has shown, the embrace of the crypto industry, as we remember the ways with Donald Trump since he took office. Listen.
Last year, I promised to make America the Bitcoin superpower of the world and the crypto capital of the planet. With the right legal framework, institutions large and small will be liberated to invest, innovate, and take part in one of the most exciting technological revolutions in modern history. For years, you were mocked and dismissed and counted out. You were counted out as little as a year and a half ago. But this signing is a massive validation.
A massive validation as we watch the gyrations in the crypto market. Pleasure to spend some time with Gary Gensler as we consider the crypto space regulations and the plumbing in the market. He's with us live now, former chair, of course, of the Securities and Exchange Commission, professor of the practice at MIT Sloan School of Management. Mr. Gensler, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. Is that you buying the dip in Bitcoin?
Joe, it's good to be back and good to be with all of your viewers. But no, I'm not participating in that market.
Well, what do you think of this? We've spent a lot of time talking about this when you were in the job at the SEC and the many warnings that you made about this potentially risky asset. And we're witnessing a reckoning in the marketplace right now. What do you think is behind it?
Look, I think it's a risk asset, and the American public and the worldwide public has been fascinated with cryptocurrencies, but it's a highly speculative, volatile asset. And putting aside Bitcoin for a minute, all the thousands of other tokens, not the stable coins that are backed by U.S. dollars, but all the thousands of other tokens, you have to ask yourself, what's the fundamentals, what's underlying it? You don't get a dividend, you don't get usual returns, and so the investing public just needs to be aware of those risks in this highly volatile space.
What do you make of the politicization of crypto? The fact that the Trump administration has become involved to this extent has reportedly turned off some investors as they watch the Trump family enrich themselves with gains like this. Is this a Democrat versus Republican thing now?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's about our capital markets. The U.S. have the greatest capital markets, and they benefit from common sense rules of the road. When you buy and sell a stock or a bond, you want to get, various information, and you want to know that you're getting the same treatment as, the big investors. That's the fairness in these capital markets that are so important.
I've heard a lot about the impact of ETFs on this space. That's something you know a lot about, the initial ETFs that were greenlit to start buying crypto. Did that just change the plumbing in the crypto market here by tying it directly to the stock market?
Well, ever since antiquity, finance goes towards centralization. So it's not surprised that which started as a decentralized ecosystem, and that was the vision, has become more integrated and more centralized. Investors can express themselves in gold and silver through exchange-traded funds, and as of a couple years ago, actually all the way back to my first year in the job, there were exchange-traded funds on Bitcoin futures, just as there is for gold and silver.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Chairman, I want to ask you about, speaking of plumbing in the markets, what happened at the CME last week, and whether you think the CFTC should be investigating this outage. Should the CME be facing additional scrutiny?
Look, it's something really well understood that are major stock exchanges and futures markets. The Chicago Mercantile Exchange trades very consequential parts of our U.S. Treasury market, interest rates markets. They're critical infrastructure. On Thanksgiving evening, they had an outage at a data center. Importantly, it wasn't actually their computers, it was the chillers, as I understand it, the cooling system in this data center. And they had an outage for about 10 hours. And so the markets planned for that. The Chicago Mercantile Exchange considered, they didn't go to their backup data center. They stayed partly because it was Thanksgiving evening, as I understand it. I'm sure that they at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange and the various regulators will keep looking at it and look for lessons learned. You always look for lessons learned and how can we do things better in the future.
Well, we've experienced an incredible number of inquiries about this at Bloomberg. Our readers are asking, our viewers and listeners are asking about this. It put a real chill in the markets, to use a terrible pun in this case. Mr. Chairman, you don't sound that worried about this being systemic.
Look, I think that the New York Stock Exchange, CME, the clearinghouses are systemically important. No doubt about it, systemically important. But what happened here at this specific moment is the cooling system, as I understand, had a glitch. By the way, this data center is operated by a third party. It's not operated by CME. So they have a contract for certain performance levels. And they didn't go to their backup data center, which is, I think, located elsewhere in New Jersey. If this were to happen at 10 a.m. on a Monday, I think the management team would make a different decision and probably would switch over to the backup data center more quickly. The markets probably would have a little less liquidity. Not every high-frequency trading shop or principal trading firm has the same connectivity to the backup data center. So that's an interesting business choice. And for your institutional listeners, if that happened, they'd probably see a little less liquidity until they get back to that primary data center.
Always fascinating to look under the hood with Gary Gensler, former chair of the SEC, professor of the practice, MIT Sloan School of Management. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the time. We're going to pile back into the cabinet room. Are you ready? President Trump has now been going for about 2 hours, and he has just turned to questions from reporters speaking now about the issue of affordability. This might be the last time we see each other till the late edition of Balance of Power. This is live on Bloomberg.